Welcome to the Global Resilience Exchange YouTube channel. My name is Doniella, and I am pleased to have a guest today to talk about resilience across many questions and platforms. I'm so excited for our first interview of this nature with Mr. Mark Carrol. Welcome, Mark.
Welcome. Thank you, Doniella. I appreciate you having me on your exchange today.
Perfect. So I'm going to jump right into these questions. You have a wealth of knowledge and experience across various platforms and industries. So, Mark, can you walk us through your journey into business continuity and resilience and let us know what your current role is? Use this time to shine.
Thanks. Um, like most of us, maybe 90% of us or more, my path into disaster recovery continuity was unique and different and not straightforward. I think there aren't too many folks who come out of school and go right into disaster recovery continuity. So my path was through information technology, and I'm a coder by trade. And like I say, anybody who manages data centers, anybody who's involved with data center operations, just the basics of backup and recovery. You have to deal with disaster recovery. You have to deal with the ability to collect the data. But I started, to be honest, as an 18-year-old in a mainframe data center for the Department of Defense. And that was really, low end stuff, mounting tapes and running reports and whatever, and then get into the software development coding activity. But from a core continuity perspective, my first continuity role was at Biogen in Cambridge. And they launched an initiative back in the day, and I don't tell you what year it was a long time ago. And that idea was to, go from disaster recovery to build out a core continuity program for certain critical functions like drug adverse events and clinical trials and things like that. Um, I was the poster child to lead that because I had contracted with SunGard. We then started the initiative and got that off the ground, and that was my first exposure. I then moved on to Gillette, and in Gillette I was in a core continuity. I'm sorry, a core IT role. But we then, started to roll out something called continuity across the individual business units. Well, we hired a gentleman who was really, really sharp. He came out of both Harvard and MIT. He was rock solid from a program management perspective, and he couldn't spell continuity. He just didn't have the experience, the exposure. But he just, I mean, you can't know what you don't know. So he started talking to us, and he grabbed me and he said, "Ooh, you're the guy that's leading this activity for IT data center activity in Blade and Razor, which was the top of house for a company that I worked for, Gillette." And he said, "And you've done this before." He said, "We're going to you first." And we then started to roll that out. He moved into another role, and I took on the role globally. And I rolled that out to 150 sites around the world at Gillette, Blade, Razor, Duracell battery, Oral-B, Braun, Parker Papermate stationery, all that. But as part of before I did that, I ran IT audit for Gillette globally, and that got me a chance to see all the data centers and all the technology environments around the world. So right now, I am the founder and adjunct faculty at Boston University, and I founded the ERM program. Um, and I say that a little tongue in cheek because I was at a conference about 2 years ago, and we were promoting the education program. And some gentleman said to me, he said, "Oh yeah, what do you know?" He says, "You're one of those professors that pontificates on different things and doesn't have a whatever." And I said, "Wow." I said, "Wow, maybe I sent the wrong message because my history is really a practitioner. That's what I am. I'm a practitioner. And what comes out in the classroom is the history of a practitioner and things that have happened in the marketplace." So, I leave the theoretical stuff, the philosophical diatribe to other people. Let other people be the thought leaders. I'd like to deal with the real world, to be honest, and deal with the activities that take place in a real environment where you have to recover and assess risk and then recover from the residual risk.
Well, I think I can definitely say rolling out a program over 150 sites definitely doesn't make you someone who just pontificates. You definitely have some skin in the game. So that's a great story. And I think, like I said earlier, crossing so many different industries, retail and you got some manufacturing in there, dealing with supply chain, and then now bringing it to higher education. So that's really awesome. So, in moments of uncertainty or chaos, what anchors you personally as a leader?
I think you need to step back and draw off your experience, all right, as a kind of a starting point framework, but be able to assess the situation at hand, the nuances or oddities of the situation you're facing. There is no cookie cutter way to deal with anything. You may not know at all because you don't have the experience, the exposure. But even if you do know, you only know what you've experienced and seen, and you've got to apply that, but not run through that blindly. Um, there's an author I like to use, and I won't mention who, but he does a great job of portraying how you lay out, the framework for risk and recovery and what it means and how you deal with it. And then it says, and here is how you do it. And I kind of draw a line between the two and say, okay, here is a way of doing it, but the situation you face is going to dictate exactly what you do. So I'll accept the logic, I'll accept the rationale, I'll accept the lead in, but when it then says, okay, pull out this sheet and do it this way, I'm going to figure out what the right situation is. I think experience gives you a framework that you can leverage, but it's not a cookie cutter. And if you've lost your ability to open your mind and think beyond what you've learned and seen, that's a limitation.
Thanks for that. Sometimes we are our biggest limiters, right? So, my next question is, what is the greatest investment that you have made in yourself?
Um, at a high level, I would say it's all aspects of education. And training in there different, but both of them separately and together need to be there. Um, you've got to have formal classroom understanding, but at the same time, you've got all these great industry certifications coupled with on-the-job training. So, I've had a host of opportunities, cross industry, cross discipline, doing a whole lot of different things. Um, but I'll tell you, like you mentioned supply chain. I spent decades in supply chain. I've got a solid IT background. When it comes to engineering and marketing, so much, and I'll admit that. So like the old saying, a man's got to know his limitations. Yeah, I kind of know where to draw my own lines. All right, but I had an opportunity years ago, and the company I worked for developed a corporate internship in IT that was cross discipline, and you spent 9 months to a year in each of the key operations in the firm. So I spent a year in finance. I spent a year in marketing. I spent a year in manufacturing, and all related to systems and technology applications in those areas. And you get a great understanding of the cross of the business and what it means. Now, beyond that, developing a graduate program at BU turned out to be honest to you, somewhat self-serving. Okay. I get a chance to sit in front of a group of students, many of whom are seasoned practitioners, and they've worked in various risk disciplines that I can talk to them openly about, or I don't even know. So I'll give you an example. I've got a current student in one of my classes, and he's got a good, solid understanding of the details of insurance. I know insurance pretty well. He deals in marine insurance. Oh. Marine insurance is a little bit different than what Mark Carrol can talk about. All right. So, I learn at his feet and I get understanding from him because when you get a number of people in a room who have something to offer, yeah, everybody learns. And I think that's the most important thing is invest in yourself, but keep your eyes open and learn. And if you think you're done education wise, you are. And that's sad.
Thanks for that. I am actually an alum of Boston University, not the
I know.
ERM program, but the Healthcare Emergency Management program. So I'm
Hmm.
really happy to see that that program is flourishing at the university. Mark, tell us, if you could leave the audience with one continuity or operational resilience mindset, what should they apply this month? what should they do immediately?
Um, I don't know how immediate I would call it, but I
Okay.
think you need to kind of baseline and take inventory of your own experience and your own knowledge, and identify what you know. And to be honest, don't shortchange or dismiss what you know and what you've seen. And feel free to convey to others what you've learned, because we all have different experiences. We've all been coming from different industries and different roles, etc. And they are varied and different. And you've got something, I've got something that somebody else may not have and can learn from. So feel free to convey that insight to others and be open about it. Okay. Especially in the early stages of your career where you're not sure, well, do I have anything to offer? Well, maybe you really do and don't realize that. Okay. We've all got, skills in our back pocket that we've learned over the years. It may not be continuity related, it may not be business related. It may be something as simple as I'll tell you something silly. I can braid a rug. My mother taught me when I was 10 years old. I can braid a rug. Now, where's that going to get me? That in a quarter gets me a cup of coffee. I get it. But the bottom line is we all have exposure and skills that we don't realize that are dormant, that we don't value, that may be worth talking to other people about. And the second thing I would say is at a high level, especially in the private sector, know your organization and know their numbers. Know how they function, know what top line looks like, bottom line looks like, and what the cost structure looks like in between. So, we look at crisis and we look at we deal with the fire, the flood, the earthquake, etc. But at the end of the day, the firm is impacted more significantly by exchange rate risk or liquidity, things that are keeping it alive or not as a business. Strategically, what are they offering that's long term? Kodak didn't disappear because they had a fire. Kodak disappeared because the offering had no value. So from a continuity perspective, look at, what keeps the operation alive strategically, and then operationally, is it a worthwhile effort? Because if I can't be successful financially, then that firm's gone. It's a walking dead person, and it's just a matter of time. So understand the numbers.
I can really appreciate that. You obviously get to talk to a lot of different people, students coming through your program, but just all the conferences that you attend. And I think we often underestimate our skills. And I see this as a former lecturer, right? You see students and you're like, that's amazing. And they're like, no, ma'am, it's just normal, right? It's because they're so comfortable with it and they do it all the time that they kind of forget that that's not the norm for everyone else. And so I definitely believe in having people kind of, celebrate themselves and do the humble brag,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. I think it really can
Hmm.
make a difference. And you never know, that little piece of thing or knowledge that you have could really improve someone else's life, but you haven't shared it yet, so they don't know.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, with all the conversations and exposure that you're having, what challenges do you see organizations facing in adopting innovative solutions for resilience?
Um, I see them going, like I said, beyond the fire, flood, earthquake into the broader aspects of their product offering and their strategic presence. All right. I think from a continuity disaster recovery perspective, we've adopted this word called resilience. And, depending upon who you talk to, it has multiple definitions. And like most words, when you use it, you need to define it in the context so people know exactly what you're talking about, because it means something different from you than it is for me. And I go to a sidebar for a minute. I had this conversation in class the other night, and I said, outside of this room where we talk risk and recovery, what does RTO mean? And they said, "Oh, recovery time objective." And I said, no, no. 98% of the world is now calling it return to office. It got hijacked. It got hijacked with COVID. So when you talk RTO, 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 you better put it into context. All right. I think the same thing happens to resilience. I think we've done a search and replace on our documents, replacing risk with resilience, and then putting it forward as the same thing. And and trying to charge more money for the services related to it because it's now a bigger deal. Well, it may be a bigger deal for you, but it wasn't for me, or wasn't for her, it wasn't for him. People will say, "Oh, now our recovery involves third party TPRM, third party risk activity," and it's like, okay, and somebody else had that in place 15 years ago. So the fact that you now added that dimension is wonderful. The fact that you think it's a transition from continuity to resilience, I'm not sure there is a transition there. You adopted something that's already been in the marketplace. So I do cringe a little bit over the word resilience, and I look at resilience as something broader than the traditional continuity silo, and we now need to get there. So it's third party risk, it's succession planning, it's like I mentioned, liquidity, it's exchange rates, it's anything that can sink a firm. And if you go back and look over who's gone over the years, Blockbuster didn't go because they had a fire. And Scandinavian Design didn't disappear because they had a flood. These firms had problems internally, or technology replaced them, or something happened that had, there's totally out of the purview of the traditional BCDR professional.
Yeah, the new and shiny things are sometimes a distraction. We've been doing things a certain way for a while, and there's a reason why they were still needed, right? So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
don't always have to evolve and come out with new things, and kind of just really stick with the foundation and make sure that it's working and the masses are receiving it. So I definitely agree with that.
Hmm.
You talked about starting a program at Boston University. And so I have an idea that you are future thinking, right? You want to make sure that the next set of practitioners and business owners, et cetera, are going to be prepared for the future. So, what does building a resilient future mean to you in your current role?
Um, in my current role as an educator, I think it's learning the root cause and what is at stake and at risk. So, for example, we jump in and we talk risk. Okay, we start talking about what is at risk and what risk means, whatever. Well, risk is something we use to protect value. So we got to go back a step and talk value. Where does value come from? So what I teach in the class, to be honest, is strategic, competitive stuff like Michael Porter's five forces of value, where they comes from, how I guarantee margin, how I make sure that I can competitively deal with situations, because it starts with what am I trying to protect? Okay. Then we talk about the risk against that value. But if you jump in and talk risk only, you've not defined where the valuation is. Companies have various product lines and services, and they need to look at them through a lens of which one is the pork chop, which ones make the money, which ones are more significant than others. Company I worked for, you'll laugh at this, company I worked for owned a business years ago. That business was something called the Welcome Wagon. Now, the welcome wagon was something back in the 60s or 70s. It died, I think, in the 80s. And what it was when you moved into a town, these people would show up at your front door with a gift box and tell you all about where the schools are and whatever else. But they owned this corporation. Now, when there's a crisis, is that going to be top of mind to recover? No,
No
no,
chance.
because there are half a dozen other business units that are really what the business is all about. This just happens to be a sideline. Okay. So you kind of got to know where the important issues are. All right. Second thing is, I would say you need to my own case. I like to make sure that I learn as much as I can along the way. And I think we've got a job to do as employees, and we do the job to contribute. But we've got to have our third eye on learning and seeing and knowing the overall business and the overall environment that we're in. Uh, be curious about what the other person's doing. Ask, how do you do that? Why do you do that? What's going on here? And, within your own work environment, you know, it's a function of something else within the end-to-end operation. If you don't know the end-to-end operation, go learn it. go take every advantage and opportunity you can to learn it.
Think learning, continuous learning, right? Like continuous improvement can certainly be applied to any practitioner or any professional inside and
Hmm.
outside of resilience. And I think what you're saying should really resonate with people. And there's so many ways to learn, right? It could be an online course, it could be going to a conference, it could be shameless plug going to the continuity coffee and chat or the global resilience exchange forums, right? And just learning from each other. I think there's so many of opportunities and there's so many formalized degree programs and certifications now that didn't exist 20 years ago. And so there is a ton of opportunity. And you kind of touched on this already in different parts of your answers, but is there any other advice that you would give to future resilience professionals?
Yeah, I think I go back to know the numbers and learn the business. So if I can go to a specific uh, silo of our of our history, like I say, I'm an IT person by trade, and it's pretty easy as an IT person whose career is going to be, data centers and coding and operations and whatever, it's pretty easy to focus on the next generation of technology and the next improvement in in the technology and how the network configurations are going to advance and things like that. And you can do that in a vacuum without even knowing where you work, without even knowing what the deliverables are, without even knowing why you're working there, because you're so focused on what you want to stay current with that you don't look at where it applies. You don't look at what it's used for. You have a tendency to say, "Oh, I've got the fastest, cheapest, whatever." What do you do for business? Oh, I don't. They use it for something. I don't know what. That's not good. I give it a funny example, a bit of a sidebar. We had a gentleman I worked with years ago, and he worked in procurement and he bought and sold and whatever and did his thing. Well, he bumped into a an invoice. That wasn't his area, but he bumped into it and he said, "Oh, look at this. This is an invoice for plywood, okay, and for two by fours, yeah, and also by big stock, two by tens, big heavy, structural stock." And he said, "We crate machines and ship them overseas. We use a ton of plywood. We use a ton of two by fours. We never crate in two by tens. What what's going on here?" Well, it turns out that we had a person in finance who was building a garage, and he had the vendor ship stock to his house. Okay. But without knowing the business of the crating process for our machines, he would never have thought twice about that. But he knew it. He knew what we used, and as a result, what we didn't use. And as a result, he flagged them, and that person got marched out the door about 5 minutes later. Okay. But the point is he knew the business, he knew the intricacies, and he could have spent his whole career looking at, payments and things on the purchasing side, but no, he knew the business.
That's an awesome story. Yeah, there's a reality to what we're doing, right? It's not just keeping the doors open, but understanding the full picture. And when you understand the full picture, when you know the business, your resilient strategies can be that much better, right? Because you know what to do, what to spend your time on, who to talk to. It could really be a changer. So that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, I'll give you
Um,
one more. I'll give you one more if you
Please.
don't mind. It's not just a
Yeah.
question of knowing things, it's also what foundational things will help you go further. So as I mentioned, I work for a company. I was in different functions and an internship and whatever. And we had a small staff that actually left at the same time. One young lady left the job, and another person had to go for medical reasons. And they did a unique function for the firm. They handled export operations. Now, you can't find export in a textbook. You can't go to, XYZ University and learn export management. It's all on the job, in the warehouse, at the shipping dock kind of stuff. And it's letters of credit, it's bills of lading, it's you telling me you can't I mean, it isn't natural. You don't see it. But we needed somebody to lead that. And my boss said to me, "We're in trouble here." And I said, "Well, who knows anything about that?" He said, "Nobody." He says, "We just don't have anybody with that skill here." I said, "Okay." I said, "Give it to me. I can't do any worse than the next guy." But I knew the operation, I knew the financials, okay, and I knew enough of a framework to be able to learn the other piece. Now, without knowing the business and knowing what the machinery was and whatever else, I couldn't do this job. Okay. So I had a platform to work from that had been developed elsewhere. Now, I will tell you, export's a heck of a tough job. And it's really a challenge. But it's still to this day, I don't think you can go to Larry's export school and learn this stuff.
Yeah. I I think that's really important too. 'Cause also, something that you're talking about is opportunity. And it's not something that I see now, right? We're not really willing to take a chance on folks to teach them what they need. They just kind of have to
Mm,
come with the knowledge already. And that's really
mhm.
tough, right? Because, well, where am I supposed to get it? And like you say, there's no exporting 101, there's no export school. And so, and then up until recently, if we're honest, there wasn't a business continuity degree, there wasn't an emergency management degree. That's kind of modern history if we think about it.
Hmm.
But we have all
Hmm.
of these amazing practitioners that through opportunity we're able to gain the knowledge and be able to practice. And so
Sure.
I think we got to kind of revisit those opportunities where we can do on the job training. And I love a rotational program. I love internships, and I wish more organizations would do that, especially
Mm.
for continuity, emergency management, crisis, IT. The list goes on. It's tough though,
Sure.
right? Because in a crisis, you're not really in the position to be like, hey, do you know how to do this? It kind of just needs to be done. So wherever we can figure out how to frame it out in order to be able to give people those opportunities is something I think as an industry as a whole, we should really be looking into. You mentioned, operational resilience and how some of these newer terminologies, while they may not be new, are kind of taking over. And I thought of going on a job search, and if you type in resilience, there's tons of things that come up. Or if you go on YouTube, for instance, if you type in resilience, you might get someone like us who's talking about business resilience, but you could get someone who's doing meditation and breath work or self-care, and it's just so wide now. So, Mark, what does resilience mean to you personally, and how has that definition changed over time?
Before we answer that, let me tell you a bit of a side story that's related to what you just said. I worked
Sure.
for a company, and the company sold barcode data collection equipment. And there was a gentleman who was a regional manager, and he was a regional manager of media. And I went to him and I met him and I said, "Oh, media, you handle publications, you handle the print activities in magazines, you handle the ads, you're the outward facing media guy." And he looked at me and he like I had two heads. And he said, "No," he said, "I sell labels. I sell the media you
Oh,
print on." He says, "I sell
oh.
labels. I sell strips that you print on. That's the media." And I went, "Oh." So in a barcode context, it makes perfect sense. But outside of that context, I'm looking pretty silly. And he looked at me like I was a complete idiot. He said, "No, I sell labels. I sell things that you put barcodes on and print them." That's the media aspect of what I do. Okay. So,
Precision of language.
well, and the other example I like to use, I've used this in the past, is we're talking hot, cold, and warm sites, right? And we when we hear the word cold site, we kind of have a mental picture of what that means. Desk, chair, maybe a phone, not much more, and it could be varied. Okay. When we say hot site, we have a picture of what that means, which is maybe immediate failover, maybe dual processing, something like that. That's whatever. When we say warm, we've got nothing without context, without
Yeah.
explanation, without how far along that gauge we are from cold to hot. So when you hear the term warm, you've got to ask, okay, now let's drill into that because I don't even have a frame for what that means. I got a frame for cold, I got a frame for hot. I got nothing for hot for warm until we talk. until we center on what that means. Okay. Now, on the resilience side, I think like I said, I think we're getting into areas. I'll have to get into areas that are basically beyond crisis management, real-time survival. Getting away from, just like I say, the earthquake and the fire and the flood into some of the broader aspects of what's going on. Years ago, there was a publication that was pretty well regarded called Continuity Central. And Continuity Central had this metric they used to publish that said it said it's open to debate. 60% of all firms that don't survive a crisis are gone in 2 years, or 80% are gone in 5 years, or 30% are gone in 2 years. And they had these numbers all over the place. And the issue really is, I don't care what the numbers say, have a plan. Because if you don't have a good solid plan to recover, you're walking dead. It may be 6 months, it may be a year, it may be a 50% rate, it may be a 10%, but you're not going to survive. So the absence and presence of a plan is where we start, but that plan's got to be everything from the top down. The minute somebody stops allowing us to ship into Latin America, there's a drop in your revenue. Are you ready for that? Did your stress test? Did your stress test assess that? Okay. Years ago, I worked for a company that had a lot of sales in Argentina, and Argentina used to have a pegged peso pegged to the dollar. It wasn't a floating rate. Okay, like everything, you see floating rates for everything. It wasn't floating, and you can't live that way. And they said it's going to break, it's going to break, it's going to break, and all of a sudden it did break, and the peso became three and a half to the dollar. You couldn't buy anything out of Argentina because you couldn't afford anything for offshore because your dollar was now worth about 30 cents and you were dead. That's a big problem, and people need to look into that and look at where their money comes from, what they do. We had a company I worked for, as another example. We had an outlay for a given soap, and it was a small spend, small amount of revenue to the vendor, and it was only for us. Okay, so you say, okay, no big deal, not a lot of money. Well, it washed 3 billion with a B, $3 billion in product. Now, we didn't spend $1 million on it, but it was the difference between $3 billion making its way out the door. So are we at risk? Yeah, because they don't make a lot of money on it, and we don't spend a lot of money with them. So how do we protect ourselves when they say we just kind of decided not to make that anymore? What do we do?
Yeah, partnership is tough, right?
Oh yeah.
Vendors, suppliers are tough because at the end of the day, you want to say you're on the same page, but there's always going to be a competing mission, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
What's the greatest leadership advice that you have ever received?
When I decided to go to grad school, I was working and I was going to grad school part time, and I was a technology guy. I wrote code and whatever else. And I went into my boss and I started talking about going to grad school, and I said I'm going to get my master's in MIS or IT or whatever it was at the time. And oh boy, and he looked at me and he said, "You know IT, so it's all well and good to have a degree in that and be at whatever." He said, "But you need to learn the business." He said, "You need to learn how the business operates." And he said what I said before, which is if you know the numbers, you know the business. He said, "Learn the business." And that's why I went back to school for finance. Now, where'd finance come from? Well, it's integral to the business. It wasn't something that I was that interested in. Now I really am interested in it. But I think the best advice would be to go broad, not surgical. And by that I mean if you learn a skill, if you learn a capability, and you're tied to a fairly narrow set of skills or capabilities, it can just plain go away. It can just plain disappear. Um, Replaced by technology, replaced by regulatory activity that says you can no longer do it because you don't have the right credential for it or whatever else. Um, I'm going to tell you how old I am. I started in high school and college. Now, this is my kids say, what are you talking about? And I worked in a store and I ran an elevator. Now, If you ever see those old movies where the old men or the young men are out there moving the elevator up and down, settling it on the floor, all that kind of stuff, that's what I
Yep.
did for high school and college, right? Now, how far you think that's going to get me today? Okay.
Not far at
So
all.
not at all. So the narrow set of skills is an issue. For 20 years, I've cringed every time I go through a toll booth and I say, when they automate this, what's the skill set coming out of this toll booth and what's that person going to do? Make change at a 7-Eleven? I don't know. Not to put them down, but they've not developed the skill that's going to, manage a household. And I think the issue really becomes make sure that you've got a wide breadth of understanding and are not tied to a capability, a capacity, a tool, a product, etc., that what you know can be broadly applied elsewhere.
You're talking about being a professional and being able to sustain yourself through this life, right? So that's
Mm.
super important. So thank you for sharing that. All right. I would like to do rapid fire with you. So don't take too much time to answer the following questions. Um, we're gonna take a stab at it, okay? Are you ready?
Oh,
All right. First question. What have you read that we should read?
um, I listed on when you asked me before, I listed The Great Influenza by John Barry.
Okay.
Okay.
What have you
It's a, let me stop for a second. Not only because it's great, but because it's about the Spanish flu in 1918. And my dad was an orphan. Both mother and father died based on Spanish flu. And he grew up studying in an orphanage. So it has a
listened?
special meaning for me, and the Barry book is great.
Thank you for sharing that. What have you listened to that we should listen to, whether that's a podcast, YouTube channel, or music?
Um, you wouldn't like my music. Um, I would
You never.
I would say I would say, there's a lot of great stuff out there and like this session. I mean, listen to this after I finish. Somebody else is better than me. But seriously, listen to the BCI. Alex Fullick does a great job with what he does in his podcasts. The individual ACP chapters around the country all hold their sessions and they're great. They've got people rotating in and out to speak. So, look at what's out there as far as an exposure is concerned on these general sessions. I think that's the kind of stuff I would listen to. And when you listen to it objectively, because that person might be saying something that doesn't fit your world, does fit your world, or you just plain don't agree with and feel comfortable knowing that. Maybe not so much challenging that, but knowing that.
Fair enough. What have you watched that we should watch? And that could also be YouTube, a documentary, or a movie.
Yeah, I think these workshop sessions, like I say, from Alex and ACP and the BCI are really, really good. Um, I to be honest, I'm going to take you way back. I've got two movies in the back of my head that I think are outstanding. Okay,
Please.
and they're related to organizational development, teams, collaboration. And without that, I don't care what business you're in, you're not going anyplace unless you're running your own storefront by yourself. Um, they are, first of all, 12 o'clock high about a military activity post World War II, or actually during World War II and after. And it relates to how they interact and what the team activities are and what they need to do to collaborate and whatever else. And it's a great, great organizational development kind of movie. The second one is also an old movie called 12 Angry Men, and it's about a courtroom and how they are deciding on guilt or innocence of a suspect and the dynamics of them going up and down like a roller coaster and what that means. And they both are about coalition building, team building, separation, logic, etc. And I think they're just really good to watch and sit there and sit through, how the interaction takes place and how people's minds are changed over time or not. And it's just a great teaming kind of those are two great teaming kinds of movies.
Thank you for sharing. What is Song, a book, or a movie that would be your life's theme or anthem. This one should be fun.
There's a book, and again, I'm going way back. There's a book by an author called Heilbronner. And Heilbronner wrote a book called The Future is History. Okay. And the bottom line is all the stuff that we do is rooted in history. So we didn't wake up and do something today. It's all been built up over time. All of our individual preferences, our nuances. My wife looks at me and will say, "Oh, that's your father talking." Yeah, she's right. That's where it comes from. All right. But the future is history is a real well laid out example of um, why things have changed. And again, this book is decades old, but it goes back to detailed history and explains how these things came about. All right, and where they happened. And I'm also fascinated by anything related to World War II. And I don't mean the war. I mean the lead up to the war and the mistakes made in the First World War that really set the table for the Second World War and how people
Mm,
came to power under situations that wouldn't normally have happened. I think that whole dynamic is fascinating. There's an old story that says Hitler came to power in World War II because of democracy. And and go back and read through it, and it's like, yeah, he used it to get there, and then he killed it. Now I don't want to get political, but the bottom line is it's interesting to see, how the lead ups take place and how doors open that are good and bad based on what we're seeing in our histories.
thank you. Mark, it's been a pleasure having you as an interviewee today for the Global Resilience Exchange Channel. Folks, if you liked what Mark said today, please connect with him. I will put his LinkedIn as well as the email address in the description. He is open for connection and conversation. Please give this video a thumbs up. We want to thank him and encourage him for all the work that he's doing in the industry. And share this interview with a colleague or a student that's interested in resilience. So before I end, Mark, what are two words that express your feelings about today's interview or the Global Resilience Exchange?
I think it starts with the exchange, and I think the issue becomes this is important messaging. Those folks in the early part of their careers, all right, will benefit from that, but others as well. I think seasoned practitioners could consider, what's being discussed and not look at what they know and say, there's nothing more than what I know. Since I don't know it, it can't be important. And I think that's a
Mm.
mistake that some of us all make at all times. Um, there's a philosopher, psychologist, I guess, called Maslow, and Maslow's got something called Maslow's golden hammer, and it's in simplistic terms, it's that old phrase that says, "If the only tool we have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail." I think we look at our industry and we say, "Okay, I'm gonna do what I need with my skills to get this resolved or fixed or whatever," and it's very prevalent in our industry that we think we know what needs to get done because of the skill we have. And I think it becomes a wait a minute, maybe it takes another skill. Maybe you need to go out and buy or rent or borrow or learn another skill. But don't think you can pound that nail in with the back of a screwdriver for the rest of your life. It doesn't work quite that way. So I think it's important to go beyond our own knowledge and our own capability in terms of applying what we know and realize that there's more out there that we need to learn because the solution may be beyond what we know, what we as individuals know today.
Mark, thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us and the community. Thanks for joining the sessions on either the first Thursday of the month, which is Continuity Coffee and Chat, and you've even attended the Global Resilience Exchange, which is the third Wednesday of the month. I look forward to having you on future sessions of those forums and sharing what you have with different colleagues across the globe. Is there anything else that you want to share before we sign off?
No, just a thank you. I much appreciate you having me on. And if I can help in the future, please feel free to reach out. But thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Mark. And to everyone who's watching, thank you for taking the time to watch this YouTube channel. Once again, please like this video, subscribe to the channel so you get updates about more interviews, as well as share this video with colleagues. Take care, everyone.